Hi, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Hope you all are doing well. So, this is my first video on YouTube. So, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Shubham Agarwal. My qualifications, I'm a commerce graduate and a qualified chartered accountant. So, the objective of making this YouTube channel is to make mathematics more fun, more interesting, and super easy. So, I will be taking many videos, many sessions on various topics of mathematics, and I hope you all like it and find it insightful, right? So, let's get started. Let me share my screen and let's start with our first topic. Okay. Okay. So, our first topic is the history of numbers, right? So just imagine you are living in a world where there are no numbers, right? And I ask you, you have to tell me your age. Do you think is it possible? You don't have to use numbers. You have to tell me your age. Okay, if I ask you what is the time right now, can you tell me without using numbers? No, right? Okay, let me take one more example. If I ask you how many fishes are there in these image, can you tell me? Again, you don't have to use numbers. Seems tough, right? Okay, one last chance. You have to tell me how many sheep are there in this image, but you don't have to use numbers. Seems tough. Sounds impossible, right? So let's get back to thousands of years ago and see how numbers came into existence, right? Because thousands of years back, we did not have any numbers. So let's move back to ancient times and see how the concept of numbers came into existence, right? Okay, so in the ancient times, a primitive man needed to keep a track of lot of things. For example, there is a hunter, right? Now, hunter needs to keep a track of how many animals he has caught, right? Similarly, let's imagine there is a farmer. He has to keep a track of how many goats he owns, right? Similarly, let's say there is a shepherd. Again, he also needs to keep account of how many sheep he owns. Similarly, in case of war, we know that in ancient times there were frequent wars, right? So, in case of war, also the army, the leader of the army needed to keep a track of how many soldiers they have in their army, right? But in those times, there were no numbers. So, how to keep a track of all these things? How can I keep a track of animals, goats, sheep, soldiers, and so many other things? So we know that a man, a human, is quite intelligent, right? That's what makes him or her different from other species. So to keep a track of so many things, they came up with innovative ideas. They came up with like some intelligent ideas. So firstly, they started using fingers. They realized they can count using their fingers, right? But there was a drawback. We have a limited number of fingers, right? We only have 10 fingers, including thumb, in our hands, right? So it's not possible to calculate, to keep a track of large numbers only using fingers, right? So the next alternative was to use leaves. Because leaves was something that was easily available in the nature, right? So they started using leaves. But there was one drawback in using leaves, and that is the leaves used to get dried up easily, right? So in this image, we can see that after a few days, leaves can get dried up. So how can I keep a track for a long period of time using leaves? Then the humans came up with an alternative idea. They started using stones. For if I have to keep a track of let's say the number of sheep, For every sheep, I will take one stone. For another sheep, one stone. For another sheep, one stone. So that's how I can keep a track of the number of sheep I own, right? But there was a drawback with using stones too, and that was stones were too heavy to carry. Every time I take sheep for grazing, I cannot carry stones with me, right? They were too heavy to carry. Then they came up with alternative, that is using sticks. Now sticks were something that cannot be dried up and they were neither too heavy to carry. But again, if I have to keep a track of large number of sheep, I have a huge flock of sheep, then using sticks may not be a feasible option. It may not be convenient for me to every time carry sticks wherever I am going, right? Then what they did was started using the concept of tally marks, right? So we know that sticks were easily available in the nature, right? So they started making tally marks using sticks. So what they did was for every four sticks, and they used to take a diagonal line, right? So for every group of five, we used to represent using this symbol, right? For every one, we have a vertical line, then for two, for three, for four, and one line striking them. So this used to represent a group, right? So tally marks was one such way of representing, of counting using uh, these marks, right? But again, there was a flaw in using tally marks. If I have to keep a track of large number of animals of a large army, it may not be convenient to create tally marks for such a large number, right? But here we can understand one concept that humans discovered the idea of counting, right? They did not know numbers, but they knew they need to keep a track of so many things like animals, goats, sheep, soldiers. So they started with using fingers, they started using leaves, then they moved to stones, then they moved to sticks, and they also discovered the idea of tally marks, right? So I said that humans discovered counting, right? Using so many different things, they discovered the idea of counting. Now, here I'm using the word discovered, right? What do you mean by discovery? So there are two words. One is discovery and another is invention. So discovery is something that is natural. That was something existing already in the nature. The humans only found that, right? They did not create anything new. They just found out something that was already existing in the nature. So found something that is already in the nature. But what is invention? So invention is creating something new. If humans use their skills, their knowledge, their innovation to create something new, that is invention. So I say that humans discovered counting. Why? Because counting was something that was natural, that was already in the nature, right? It was not something that humans created, but they just discovered the idea of counting. But invention is something that means creating something new, right? Creating something new. So, for example, numbers. We'll be learning how the numbers came into existence. But numbers were something that were invented by humans. They were not there in the nature, right? But the idea of counting was already in the nature and humans discovered it. Now let's understand how the numbers came into existence, right? So we studied that all the methods used for counting, like leaves, stones, fingers, they had one or the other drawback. Now came the idea of numbers, right? So if we talk about the earliest times, the first number system that came into existence was an Egyptian number system. As the name suggests, it invented in the country of Egypt. So what is Egyptian number system? So in the Egyptian number system, okay, so what happened in the Egyptian number system, the humans used to take the help of pictures to represent different numbers, right? So we call it as like I will show you. So there were various symbols, and different symbols used to represent different number. Like I can see a vertical line, then I can see a coil, I can see a finger, a lotus, right? So these were various symbols that were used to represent different numbers on the basis of power of 10, right? But again, there was a drawback in using these symbols. What was that drawback? Can anyone think of that? So the drawback is was that it was difficult to write large numbers using these symbols. For example, if I have to write the number, let's say 4,623, what I have to make is I will have to make four letters, right? First, I have to learn how to make this. So it will be something like this. I have to make it four times. Then for six, I have to make it six times. Then I have to make the symbol two times, and again I have to make it three times. So don't you think it is quite difficult to make to represent any numbers using such symbols, right? So it had its drawbacks. Then came the idea of Babylonian number system. So in the Babylonian number system, there were only two symbols that were used. One was the vertical hinge, and another one was the covered hinge. So vertical hinge was something like this, and cover hinge was something like this. And these two symbols were used to represent different numbers. Again, it was not easy to represent any number using the Babylonian number system, right? Because to write large numbers, I have to make many symbols. That was not easy. And secondly, the biggest disadvantage was that there was no zero. There was no symbol to represent nothing, right? We know that in today's times, we use zero to represent nothing. But in Babylonian number system or in even Egyptian number system, there was no zero. So how to represent nothing? That was a challenge, right? Then came the concept of Roman number system. Now, we all are aware of Roman number system, right? So in the Roman number system also, we have few symbols that are derived from the letters, right? For example, if I have I have V, I have X, I have L, I have C, I have B, and I have N. So these are the main symbols that are used for representing any number in a Roman number system. But there was a drawback in Roman number system, and that was I cannot represent large numbers using Roman number system. Right. For example, if I have to represent any number using the Roman number system and I'm not using barbs, so the maximum number that I can represent is what? It will be 3,999, right? Because for 4,000, I don't have any symbol. Because I know that in Roman number system, a particular symbol cannot be repeated more than three times. So I cannot go beyond 3,999 in the Roman number system, right? So these were the drawbacks of Roman number system as well. And finally came the idea of Hindu Arabic number system. Now, what is Hindu-Arabic number system? So we learned that in all these number systems, whether it's Egyptian number system or the Babylonian number system, let me like it here, Babylonian number system, there were drawbacks. It was difficult to represent large number using these symbols, and the biggest drawback was there was no zero. I did not have any symbol to represent nothing, right? So similarly, in case of Roman number, I cannot represent large numbers. I don't have anything to represent nothing, right? So came the idea of Hindu Arabic number system. So Hindu-Arabic number system is the number system that we used till date across the world. And we know that in the Hindu-Arabic number system, initially, there were a total of 9 digits, that is 1 to 9. I will write it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right. So there were initially 9 digits that were a part of Hindu-Arabic number system. After that, there was a special invention that is zero, one of the most important invention of modern times that was given by a Indian mathematician Aryabhat. So zero changed the way we write numbers, right? We will be learning more about the importance of zero, what is place value system in our next video. But you need to understand zero was one of the most important contributions by Aryabhata in mathematics. Okay, so we can say total, we have a total of 10 digits in our number system. And these 10 digits can make any number that we know. You cannot name any number, any real number in this world that is not made up of either of these 10 digits. Every number is made up of these 10 digits. So it's magic, right? How can these 10 digits make infinite numbers? So we'll be learning how is this possible, what is place value system in the next video. But we got an idea that how the numbers came into existence, right? So let me give you a quick recap. So I started with the question that can you tell me your age without using numbers? You were not able to tell. I asked you, can you tell me the time right now without using numbers? You were not able to tell me. I asked you, what is the count of fishes in this image? Again, without using numbers, you cannot tell me. I asked you, what is the count of sheep in this image without the help of numbers? You were not able to tell me. So we moved back to thousands of years back when there were no numbers. But still, humans needed to keep a track of so many things like goats, sheep, other animals, soldiers, everything. And we know that the primitive man was very intelligent, that makes humans different from other species, right? So they started using different things that were available in the nature to count different objects, to keep a track of different objects. So they started using fingers, but it had its own limitations. I have limited number of fingers. Then they started using leaves. Again, leaves were something that could easily get dried up. Then they started using stones. Now, stones were something that were too heavy to carry, right? So it was not feasible to use stones. Then they started using sticks. Again, if I have a huge quantity, I have a huge flock of sheep, it may not be feasible to use sticks. Then they invented the idea of tally marks. Then tally marks also cannot be used to represent a large quantity, right? But we learned one thing that the primitive man discovered the idea of counting, right? Counting was something that was already in the nature. But humans discovered that, yes, we need to keep a track of something, we need to count. So they discovered the idea of counting, right? And then we learned about two words, discovery and invention. Discovery is founding something that was already, finding something that was already there. But invention is creating something new, right? So I can say that numbers is something that were invented, but counting was something that was discovered, right? So then we learned how the numbers came into existence. What are the different number systems? So the oldest number system that we know is Egyptian. So in Egyptian number system, various symbols or pictures were used to represent different numbers, like a vertical line, a coil, a lotus, a finger. All these were used to represent different numbers. But it was not easy to use such complex symbols to represent numbers, especially the large numbers. Similarly, we had a Babylonian number system. It only had two symbols, but it was not easy to represent large numbers using Babylonian number system as well. Then we learned about the Roman number system. So in the Roman number system, we had a total of 7 symbols that were derived from letters. So again, in the Roman number system, it was not possible to represent large numbers, right? Then finally came the Hindu Arabic number system. So Hindu Arabic number system was invented in India only in the 5th to 6th century of the Common Era, and later on it spread onto the Arab world. So that is why it is known as the Hindu-Arabic number system. Okay. And initially we had only 9 digits, that is 1 to 9, but later on Aryabhat gave us the most important digit, that is 0, right? So total we have 10 digits in our Hindu-Arabic number system that is used across the world. And these 10 digits can make every number of this universe. And how is this possible that only 10 digits will make every number of this universe? What is place value system? How the numbers are made? We will be learning about all this in our next video, right? Okay. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. You got a basic idea of how numbers came into existence and why numbers are so important and what were the problems when there were no numbers. Okay, so in the next video, we'll be learning something very interesting, very new, and very important. And any feedback, any suggestions, you can definitely share in the comment box. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.